Hey everyone, I've got Dave Feldman on for the second time. I'm really excited about this. Great to have you back on, my man.
Thank you for having me, Martin.
Absolute pleasure. So a lot's happened since last year, which we'll get into since we last spoke. But firstly, just for people who haven't listened to the last one or, been sleeping under a rock because you're pretty big in this space now, tell us a bit more about yourself and just give us a bit of an insight for the audience.
Yeah, if you don't know me at all, I'm kind of an obsessive engineer who literally 10 years ago um, found out my cholesterol levels were exceptionally high after going on a ketogenic diet. I then became quite obsessed with the mechanisms behind why. And also, of course, with the other major question we're interested in, which is, does this mean I'm at higher risk? Does this mean other people who see this phenomenon like I'm seeing are at higher risk? And so on the first question, we've now published many papers related to what I would refer to as the lipid energy model, which I think explains why many people like myself who are metabolically fit might see a rise in their cholesterol, especially if they're leaner. And to the second question, that's been a bit more work that requires raising a lot of money, organizing a lot of people, and getting a whole research center involved. And I'm thankful to say that quite literally today, I did a presentation on the fourth and final analysis against the scans that we did. They're called CT angiography scans for our participants for this longitudinal data set for a study we call Keto CTA.
Great. Let's get straight into that then. Unless there's any more context you want to add, I'd love you to just get straight into that. And it was about a year ago when we had the last chat. So just talk us through that and the last year leading up to that, all this stuff that's been unfolding recently.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, last year was when I think we presented the match analysis. The match analysis was where we were able to, or at least Lundquist had access to another study called Miami Heart. Miami Heart also had within its pool a number of people who are metabolically healthy that it could pull out what's called a matched control group. So the matched control is where they actually can isolate and pick up a number that have a lot of averages that fit the averages of our cohort. So for example, comparable um, blood pressure, comparable glucose levels, comparable A1C, at least fairly close, so that the only thing that's hugely different is their LDL cholesterol. Miami Heart, the LDL cholesterol was more like 123 milligrams per deciliter average, whereas in ours, it's 272 in that analysis. So over twice as much. And that was exciting because it showed that they were on par. In fact, in many of the analyses, ours was trending a little bit better, but basically uh, statistical significance that had no difference. And that was then come back around to this year, April 7th is when we published another paper, which has, since the title is now, I believe, I can't remember the exact title, but it is Plaque predicts Plaque. ApoB does not. And I want to say it's longitudinal data from the Keto CTA study. And that one was a bit interesting because that one got a lot more interest on both supporter and detractor side. There were a few things that we could have done a little bit better on the social media rollout. And I think some of the critics I agree with and some of their points, but then there are a number of things that I can't say I agree with too much. But importantly, there was a need to get to the final analysis, which is Q-angio. That's the one that I just announced in the preliminary, did the preliminary presentation on that data. And we hope to have a paper out for that one here pretty soon. But we got to add one more called heart flow. Heart flow, Dr. Budoff presented on, that was last month. So in total, we have 4 analyses for our study, a record breaker, by the way. We have a semi-quantitative analysis, which uses expert-guided readers, like, say, Dr. Budoff. That usually is a little bit more score-based, and that's what's called a semi-quantitative. And then we have 3 quantitative. So Clearly is one. That was the first one that came in and the one that the April 7th paper is against. Heart flow is another. It's a competitor to Clearly, but also uses AI-guided reading. And then finally, there's this Q-angio. That's one that Dr. Budoff and his core lab and many core labs make use of that also is very intensive. It takes a bit more time, which is why it was the last one. It takes around 2 to 3 hours per scan, which requires both an expert reader and needs to be supervised by Dr. Budoff. And so it's a lot of work to get the last one. But we have all of this redundancy, which is great. So we have all of these that are looking at the same 200 scans.
Fascinating. I just saw the most recent video, right? And what I find super interesting is it takes so long to do these things, right? Firstly, because you're trying to do, again, there's quite a few things that have gone on here, but with the metabolically healthy people, and there was stuff you mentioned about baseline plaque, and there was lots of different things that were basically flawed that you were highlighting, right? So firstly, the recent thing that came out, that was the coronary CTA, that was the keto coronary CTA one, literally the one I just saw now, right?
Coronary CTA
Oh,
one?
sorry, the keto CTA study, sorry. The
Yeah.
one that the Clearly one, right? That was a recent one that was.
Well, clearly is the one that we published that's back in April 7th.
Yep,
The more recent two are
yep.
heart and Q angio.
Okay, got it. So with where you're at now then, Dave, right? What really have you learned about this, and what have you brought to people's attention based on all that research?
Well, there is, and this is where part of the controversy gets interesting. The analyses, these two analyses, the semi-quantitative and the clearly analyses, were the first that came through the door, and they agreed in two major areas. The two that are part of the title, that plaque predicts plaque. So if you have baseline plaque, it does tend to be very predictive of future plaque progression. Not always, but often. And then the second one, that there's no LDL cholesterol or ApoB association with that plaque progression, which is a major finding given just how big our spread is. Now, that said, there was a little bit of a separation between the two. And that difference between the two, for example, in the plaque progression, was something I was very interested in early on. And I sort of talk about that in the presentation. But it's why I was very interested in not just getting the Q angio analysis, which would have been the third. And, you could almost think of it as the tiebreaker. But I think given just how, much interest was coming around for April 7th, we really wanted to have two and not just one more that was coming. And that's why we added HeartFlow. So where do we stand today with these four analyses? Well, three of them pretty much agree with each other. The semi-quantitative, the HeartFlow, and Q angio are all pretty much aligned with each other. Clearly kind of stands out. And I'll concede part of that doesn't surprise me too much. I go into that a bit more in the presentation. There does seem to be some anomalies with the Clearly data set. And it's all the more reason why we're hopeful that in time they'll consider running a quality control pass.
And what you mentioned there about, because there was something about the study where it was like, we talked about baseline plaque then, not being, obviously being a predictor, not always, like you said, of progression with, heart disease, for example, not LDL necessarily or ApoB, right? And this is like, yeah, go on, you continue.
Yeah. In all four of the analyses, they all support the April 7th paper in that there is no association between LDL and ApoB. And I'm not sure how familiar you are with, regression, especially R squared and so forth, but it's in there in that presentation. They're all 0.05 and lower. Like, it's extremely, extremely non-correlative, the relationship between both LDL and ApoB with plaque progression.
Was there, on that note then, was there anything surprising that you found personally, or people, your team, found surprising with the data when, maybe individuals whose, plaque hadn't changed more than expected, or any patterns that you kind of didn't expect or predict?
Well, the first biggest surprise was the Clearly data set. That did surprise me at first. And it's hard to kind of brief up the whole story
Yeah, I
in
know. It's a lot, isn't it?
time, but I'll just say that was a surprise. And then interestingly, I anticipated what was to come with the new data sets, but it's also why I kind of felt it was important to, you're of course familiar with the PHC, Public Health Collaboration. Uh, I wanted to make a speech there before HeartFlow and Q angio came in as to what I would expect, because part of the challenge when you're working with uncertainty is to make sure that it's clear what your hypothesis is and what expectations you believe will be met. I mean, we're getting down to the principles of the basic scientific method, Right. And so in that sense, I'm glad I put that out there, because sure enough, as the heart flow and QAngio came back, they did meet more with my expectations. So I don't want to make it sound as if there wasn't that much that surprised me, but I was also kind of thankful that what ultimately came in the next two data sets didn't have any surprises in that regard, I guess.
Quick one, if you're looking to lose fat and optimize your metabolic health, I want to offer you a free metabolic health assessment. Now, this is not a medical assessment, but it's a snapshot based on the key levers which will be holding you back from losing fat, maybe even building muscle, having a negative impact on energy, etc. So you can get one of these for free. And more importantly, I'm going to show you exactly what to do next. I'm going to map out a plan based on your score. It'll give you that so you can take the next step, get leaner, healthier, and optimize your metabolic health. Enjoy the rest of the episode.
Yeah.
Just to track back to how we can now explain it to the audience in terms of, because I know things have changed a little bit since we last spoke, but what they really need to look out for, right? Because it's still a big problem. It's still a big worry. Like I said before, I still have clients that worry when the LDL is higher. It happens time and time again. And then obviously, I know, like we talked last time, triglycerides, providing they're in a certain range and triglycerides are relatively low, then generally you see similar patterns a lot of the times in metabolically healthy people where the LDL might be elevated, but the triglycerides are low. Walk us through that a little bit more, just specifically with LDL, right? And that challenge that people have when they go to the doctors and they'll look at that one marker and then they leave in fear a lot of the times, of getting heart disease potentially, or just being unhealthy and start cutting out foods, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I can, my job is to collect the data and then deliver the data. So I can't so much give advice other than just to state what the data is showing so far. And the data is showing so far, at least within our cohort, if you want to look at its eligibility, we don't have that cohort wide. However, and my clinician colleagues would agree with my stating this, there was a subset that did have higher baseline plaque. And because it was predictive towards future plaque progression, they themselves felt even more attached to the value of imaging, that for their patients, they would be more interested in imaging the patients to assess risk. So, for example, to quote Dr. Budoff, if somebody comes in, they've got a ketogenic diet, their LDL went sky high, he himself would get at least a CAC for the patient. And if the CAC came back low to zero, again, you should look at how it compares to your age group and so forth, that there's just not strong data, even before our study, that the LDL is going to have an association with plaque, or for that matter, events. Again, there's studies before ours, but ours really solidifies it with what we've seen thus far in adding to the total supporting data. However, outside of that subset, the vast majority of our group actually did not have rapid plaque progression, except in the Clearly analysis. In the other three analyses, it was, relatively low, with a subset. This is kind of the big star of the show, that had regression, that actually had a lower amount of plaque in their second set of scans than in their first. And that's been super exciting, because sure enough, a number of them that have had confirmed regression have very high levels of LDL cholesterol and ApoB.
Wow. And these are people, now just to clarify, this is keto, people following keto
I think we
specifically?
have a lot of folks who are just carnivore as well. So I think
Okay,
it's
got it.
the two.
Okay, so this is keto and carnivore. It wouldn't be low carb, so to speak. It would be keto and carnivore specifically, and monitored, obviously.
Yeah, and to be fair, I can't speak too much to that because I haven't looked closely at what the breakdowns are from our food recall data. I just
Yep.
know what anecdotally a number of people in the Facebook groups, there's a number of participants that still share their information widely in the Facebook groups, some that choose not to. There's no rules against it. But of those who have shared in the Facebook group, of course, I can't help but notice it, even though I try not to interact with participants directly too much.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, when you look at it's like 75% now, the obesity rate in America, right? I think it's 75%. I thought it was like 40 something. And then I heard 75, but that's got to be wrong, surely.
I think, and I could be wrong, I think the most recent paper says that 92% of our population in the US has at least prediabetes or some other marker of metabolic dysfunction and above. I mean, look, there's just no getting around it. If this were, it used to be said, Gary Taubes, before the pandemic, it used to be said he would say if this was some kind of disease, the world would mobilize to do something about it if it was like infectious, right? But
Hmm.
because it's a disease, as they would say, of civilization, we seem to be a lot more adaptive to it. And I'm sorry to say, on this side of the pond, we seem to we seem to be wanting to get ahead of everyone. But hey, you guys are following us, so
Exactly. That's it. That's it. You're winning the race though by a long shot.
yeah, that's
Bloody hell.
number
Um,
one.
exactly. That's it. But we were saying, and metabolic health, and when it comes to people, a lot of people listening to this, well, a big chunk of my audience anyway, they've definitely dabbled in keto and carnivore. Some of them stick to it long term. It works for them. So when it comes to being metabolically healthy, right? You've let's just say you follow keto, you follow carnivore. Most people tend to lose weight. Anyone who eats mainly whole foods, primarily single ingredient foods, they tend to be better than when they're eating ultra processed foods, right? But I'd like to know what you think is not necessarily special, but what you think is maybe different about people taking a keto or carnivore approach. Purely not, we're not talking about people who have major immune issues and stuff like that, right? Because with carnivore, it can be helpful for people when they have serious immune conditions. It's a great elimination diet for a lot of people. But just for overall health, what are your overall thoughts on, keto and carnivore versus, keto or carnivore for one, just getting healthier and maybe losing weight, and being able to improve your relationship with food, and then B, just the adherence piece as well, right? People being able to stick to those things. I know this is not necessarily your wheelhouse, but just based on what you've seen in a lot of the research you've done.
I mean, I certainly have an opinion, and I like to lead this off by acknowledging I have friends who are on high carb diets who seem to do fine. However, to be fair, they often tend to be more athletic. So they're burning away their glucose almost as fast as they're putting it into their body. And I think that that's important. But we seem to, as a species, have found a way to break our metabolism. And I think that there's still plenty of debate as to how we got to that state. But that state being a way by which we have a dysfunction in regulating glucose in our body, that part is not, as debated, right? So once you get to that state, which is diabetes, in its various forms, then there does seem to be a lot of benefit, or at least a lot of ease of use to reducing carbohydrates. Now, that's not the end all be all, but for a good chunk of the people who are watching this right now, it if that's the situation you're in, it's no different than if you developed an allergy to something. You may still have a lot of favorite foods that involve the thing you're allergic to, and you may still be able to find a way to, have less of it and manage the symptoms and so forth. But this was my story. My story is my A1C went up to 6.1, and it was that way for the second year in a row. And then I found, hey, I could just reduce carbohydrates. I still have plenty of foods that I miss that are on the carbohydrate side of the fence, and I've just had to kind of like let go of. But virtually everything that I've ever eaten, and this is what I tell my family members, which is everything we've ever eaten ultimately comes from habit. People on the other side of the world who aren't eating the cuisines we're not eating don't know that they're missing it. So if you can take the time to build the habits, you'd be surprised what it is you can adopt as a diet if it's working for you. Now, there's this other component, which is the one you touched on, which is a number of people are doing this efficaciously, which is to say they're managing some other disease state, such as ulcerative colitis. The keto diet originally came up to treat epilepsy 100 years ago, right? But now there's a whole lot of things that Metabolic Mind is helping to find. A lot of things like such as bipolar, schizophrenia, a lot of things for which it turns out that ketogenic diets can be an adjunct treatment, or in some cases, even the entire thing to get people in healthy shape. We need to get more research to find out for sure, but that too is pretty exciting. But I'll say one more when it comes to weight loss, and this is also a stock speech I have for my family members, which is I like carnivore in particular, even though it may seem kind of boring as elimination diets go, it's very categorical. So the catch with trying to go keto is you're trying to count carbs, and now there's a whole bunch of things in the store that have the label of keto, which you're like, oh, good. There's protein chips that says keto on the label. Now I know I'm being keto by eating these protein chips. And you probably already know this, Martin. Unfortunately, that
100%. The
that's where
protein one's a big one as well. Yeah.
right, exactly. And you there's a lot of what is thought to be keto because it's resistant starch and or it's sucralose, which some people don't get a glucose spike, some people do. But at the end of the day, for my family members that are really struggling and they're saying, look, is there just a surefire way to lose weight? I usually say try for 2 weeks to have just steak and eggs. Just try it for 2 weeks. And let me take your blood work at the beginning and take your blood work at the end. And I let that data, become its own information back to them. I say, look, just treat this as a data gathering exercise. You're just getting information for me and for you. And then you let it tell you what it's doing. And so far, of the ones I've been able to talk into doing that, it's had some impact on their future behavior. It doesn't mean that they all turn into full carnivores, but it that helps when you finally can start making those connections to just how much your choices with food make a difference.
100%. And even if they just continued by eating perhaps more steak and eggs or more meat, more protein, that could be a win because it's going to blunt their appetite more. They're eating more whole meat, more whole foods. So even if they're not perfect afterwards, and once you've seen the data as well, right, that changes that, at least not for everyone, unfortunately, but for some people it'll drive behavior change because they're then aware, okay, if I continue like that, then it's not going to be ideal. Whereas if I eat like this, I know it works, So
Yeah,
that's great.
and I'll throw in a word to my good friends who are more on the plant-based side. My dad and my mom, for example, had been vegetarians through a good portion of their life. And if you're on top of it, like if you're very serious, I think you can pull off like a vegetarian version of the diet. I do get a little concerned about protein sources, especially in older age for them. I like the greater bioavailability. But that said, if I could count on them to like really stay on top of it, I think you can make a plant-based diet work, which might be at odds with some of my friends in the low carb space. It's just it I found this out when I was trying to plan my own experiment around plant-based. It's difficult because of just frankly how bioavailable meat-based, for example, amino acids. Like there's just no comparison. There's nothing like that out there because even just the complement of the composition of the different amino acids from animal-based foods happen to be in around the same proportions of what it is we do as animals. So it just ends up working out that way. Again, not to say that that's what's required, just that it tends to be a little bit easier is the catch. So you want to be mindful. You want to be mindful whatever diet you're on to try to meet your nutrient needs.
100%. And it comes back down to what we talk about always, right? Is avoiding the UPF, the ultra processed foods, as much as possible. That's a win. The best way to do that, I always talk about it, Dave, is basically what you're saying. It's not, okay, just stop eating these foods. Good luck saying that to someone and expecting them to, sustain that long term. It's how about we eat some of these foods, which we know have got all the essential nutrients we need. Going to blunt your appetite more naturally because you're having more protein. And then if you take a look at your blood markers, looks like you're getting healthier. So it's adding in rather than taking away, and then naturally people tend to make better decisions over time. But unfortunately, it's like some people, they even have real big health scares and they still don't change. Whereas some people will because you can't force someone to change, right? But talking about low carbs or keto and carnivore versus, like you said, you had a friend or a few friends who eat high carbs and they're still, healthy. What's going on in the body, just for the audience, Dave? Because there's obviously a bit of a debate there as well, right? Where the law of thermodynamics, right? If you're in a calorie deficit, you lose weight, burning more than you eat. Whereas some people say, if you're having low carbs, obviously keto, for example, you're going to go ketogenic, perhaps get fat adapted, which means your body is then essentially burning fat more efficiently and all the rest of it. What's your thought on that, on the two kind of camps, if you like? And do you think, I know you said you prefer people to do keto or carnivore as a first step if they want to make changes. But yeah, what's going on in the body there between the two?
I should make a small correction. It's not so much that I try to advise people to take a specific direction. It's just that when working with my own family and friends, I find that's the easier route
Mm,
for them thus far. It could be in a different family, especially if they have different ethical concerns with regard to um, animal agriculture and so forth, that there would be different routes that work a little bit better. But to get to your question, I mean, we are a nutrient capture processing plant, right? Like we're trying to take things into a front end of the tube and then sort out what it is we can keep and hold on to, and then send the rest to the other side of the tube. And when it comes to what we ancestrally used to consume, it was protein, fat, and very fibrous carbs. The form of carbs, getting back to what you're saying with ultra processed foods, that's brand new. That's if you think of the existence of Homo sapiens, what is 200,000 years? I want to say humans period is, I don't know how many millions. I want to say 2.5 million, but I'm not sure about that. It's just been a tiny little blink of an eye span of time for where we found ways to refine carbohydrates. So the speed of entry coming from within our digestive tract into our bloodstream is unlike anything our endocrine system has ever experienced before. So as an engineer, I can't help but think, oh, well, our machine is not, this is new material for us. We're not wired to necessarily handle this as in the way that we may have thought. And that's why I tend to find that of all versions of diets you could go on, to your point, whole food versus ultra processed, you're probably going to accidentally end up in a better place uh, in general. I hate to use ourselves as the whipping boy a second time, but basically anything you're getting from a drive-through out here is probably the opposite direction of where you want to be going, right? You want to instead be on the outside of a, a grocery store. I have to tell you, by the way, every time I go to Europe, I'm always amazed because I'll go into some kind of a grocery store and it's cold in there. It's cold because most food is at a refrigerated temperature and you don't have as much taking up the middle of shelf stable food as we do. But I'm sure you've been to the States, I
Yeah,
assume.
yeah, been to the States, yeah.
Yeah, we have just this giant center full of shelf stable foods, and just barely the outer edges, with like a little bit of a little bit of fruits and vegetables over here. The meat section is like in the back, and then like maybe some anyway. So that's part of the challenge is that I think the ultra processed foods, they're getting processed a bit quickly. And so they also give us that high a lot faster too. But the ability of our body to shuttle away the fuel into our cells or to make use of them is challenged. That part's not in question. There's plenty of science around that. At what point it becomes broken, that's a larger question. At what point does it become dysregulated? At what point can we feel like, at least symptomatically, it's been reversed? That also is somewhat debated, although a lot of people believe in, for example, the personal fat threshold, that there's a threshold based around a lot of different things, including genetics, as to where your point is, where you then become diabetic, your fat cells become very dysfunctional and apoptotic and have, macrophages and gets inflamed and so on and so forth. But for me, I think a lot of this comes back to you probably already have a sense of when you're at the edge. The idea is to try to find out sooner, to get there at an earlier point. And then you don't need to change everything you eat overnight, but you should at least start heading in the right direction. Otherwise, you wouldn't be watching this. You wouldn't be having conversations with us about doing it. Right. The
100%.
first, the first step is to acknowledge there's a problem. And if you can acknowledge there's a problem, you're already most of the way there.
100%. And you nailed it earlier as well. It's actually very, very simple. When you strip everything back, what Dave does is very technical, right? You can see me trying to, ask the questions at the start. Some of it was like going over my head. I couldn't even articulate it. I'm like, it's better off because of all the stuff that you've digested and all the stuff with the studies and everything you've gone through or put together over the last few years. I'm going to send them to your YouTube channel, right? Because they're going to have to dig in there. There's a lot to learn, right? But going back to what you mentioned about fibrous carbohydrates as well, I'd like to touch on that. Firstly, what you said earlier, I was going to say with behaviors and habits, right? It's actually very simple with food. If you can actually implement and add in certain foods, whole foods, like we talked about, even when you mentioned the supermarket, if you go to the supermarket, and even if for the average person, if like 90% of your basket or 90% of your plate, however you want to put it, is real food, is single ingredient foods, even if it is carbohydrates like Dave mentioned earlier, right? Fibrous carbohydrates, for example, if we say, providing you can digest these things, obviously a lot of variance person to person, but potatoes, for example, that's one of the highest satiety foods, potatoes, right? So if you can digest those, maybe you'll say different on this, right? But that could be That's definitely going to be a way better option than anything else when it comes to refined foods. In fact, it's going to be a good option for most. So not all carbs are treated equally, right? And fibrous carbohydrates, I guess, for some people, well, it's always going to be a better alternative than the refined stuff that we just touched on, right?
I feel like there's universal agreement, even between high carb and low carb folks. That's a no brainer. I'm sure you've heard of the potato diet.
Yeah, I was just going to say that then. Yeah,
The trick to doing the potato diet is you don't add anything. You just eat the potatoes straight up. And I think that there's a lot to say for that. There are some foods that even in experiments where I allow for carbohydrates in order to prove points. For example, um, I was doing the white bread and processed meat experiment back in the day. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, but that was basically an earlier version of what Nick's Oreo cookie experiment was, but his was had much more sizzle and sex appeal. But mine, I would allow for white bread and processed meat because I knew I wasn't going to get hooked on it. But the carbohydrate that was always a weakness for me was French fries. French fries are delicious, but they're potatoes. But they're not just any kind of potatoes. They're potatoes that are cut up into small bits that then are fried, right?
that's the big one. That's the big one, and they're deep fried in those oils, boy.
Deep
They taste
fried.
phenomenal.
They're
I'm not
nice
trying
and
to promote them, but
crispy, and
yeah, that's
they
it. The texture.
and I believe over here in the States, I don't know if it's the same way over there, is I think they're also dipped in sugar water or something like there's all
Yeah,
kinds. So it's not a potato as we think of potatoes. Uh,
definitely.
but if I were to probably have, but like, let's say I added potatoes to my otherwise low carb diet right now, I doubt it would have that much of an impact on um, like my A1C levels or anything along those lines, or even my fasting glucose. Maybe it would, but I doubt it would because of the reasons we're describing. If your GI tract has a lot to do, which is what our ancestors' GI tracts were doing, they were doing a lot to get the food from one end of the tube to the other and to get everything sorted out. It's because it wasn't highly refined. And it also kind of helps if there's a process involved, such as you making the food, as opposed to you getting the food already processed, already completed, and so forth. That, by the way, is another thing that I appreciate whenever I go to visit Europe is there's there's not a wolfing food down in the same way that there is over here. There's not a rush to try to get the food from the moment you got it in the bag into your stomach in a matter of 12 to 15 minutes. Often is why it's nice to be there. Often food is coming, in stages and not in the giant portions we have.
Exactly.
And people aren't often in a huge rush when it's time to eat. And I think that's also important. So I say this because while a lot of people want to dial in their macros, which I think can be important, especially if you've got, an intolerance to one of them, food culture shouldn't be underestimated. And again, taking it back to habits, I don't underestimate habits either. People keep assuming because I'm an engineer, I'm going to keep coming around to the mechanics of it all. But I think the mechanics of behavior get underestimated all the time. I think that's something you need to self-engineer as well.
Definitely. And an example of the behaviors is the speed of eating it. You
Yes.
even look into these ultra processed foods. I think I can't remember what it was, but it was 17 seconds or something like that. Anyway, faster. You eat the same amount of calories or something. I can't remember how that worked, but it was rapidly faster. You eat those foods as well. And when you talk about America, even here and the UK is similar. Actually, America though, I was thinking when you said about French fries, they actually had in the McDonald's in America, they show you the ingredient list. It's like one of the chemicals in there like causes cancer essentially, right? They know that. There's all these names you can't pronounce. Even in the UK, which the obesity is not too far behind America now, it's pretty bad. Ultra processed foods, I lived in the UK, I grew up on them. It's just normal. But when you go to McDonald's, they've got 4 ingredients in the French fries. They're not allowed to use, so it goes to show the
That's right.
extremes of it. It's
If I was trying to get back into fries, I would try to leave this country to eat them somewhere else. That's for sure.
100%. And when you mentioned Europe earlier, I thought you were going to go somewhere else, but I don't know if you've heard about when people go to Italy, for example, from America, and
Yeah.
they eat the pizza, they eat the pasta in particular, and they think they're gluten intolerant. Actually, they're fine. That normally tells you, is it the glyphosates? Is it the other chemicals you're consuming? Yes, probably. In America, just to be clear.
And I couldn't actually even tell you that one. That one's outside my wheelhouse, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if that were the
Mm.
case. I've had pizza in Italy and it's amazing. It
Yeah.
was worth the cheat.
Then, the key levers for metabolic health, then obviously nutrition is a big one. We've kind of covered that. Is there anything else you'd like to cover there, though? How long, by the way, how long now altogether have you been eating keto?
I mean, officially, we'll say 10 years, but with an important caveat. One, there's been a series of experiments that I've done where I've like swapped in and out carbs. Second, I would say that I'm not true keto. I would say I bounce between keto and low carb. If you treat low carb as, let's say, 100 grams of carbs a day or less, roughly, I stay within that range, generally speaking. And then I have spans of time, such as when I am vacationing or so forth, where I'm not good at being on my diet. But that said, I do tend to be very mindful of consumption total. So I do not like binge under like any circumstances. I don't just stuff myself like, oh good, it's cheat day and I go nuts because I actually believe strongly that we're going to ultimately find that's a huge cardiovascular disease risk. And it could even be worse if you've been very good about your diet up until a point in time where you decide to binge for like say a weekend. I think it can cause vascular injury, but in addition to the vascular injury, if your binging impairs stops the repair itself of the immune response. I think that's where we're going to find where a lot of these cases occur where there's a sudden, appearance of cardiovascular disease, which surprises everyone. I think oftentimes you're going to find it's because of this event that we may have induced ourselves unintentionally.
Yeah, interesting. And I want to get into that as well because I initially found you through Dr. Philip Ovadia, right? And I
Mhm.
love that episode you guys did together. Obviously, he's the get off my operating table guy, right? He has done thousands, I believe, right, of heart surgeries. Based on everything you know now with cardiovascular disease, is there anything that people can actions they can take? Obviously, we talk about diet. I know it's very broad, but what is it that there's so many factors, right, going on. There's so many variables as well that it's not never going to be one thing. But if you had to say, right, these are the things you mentioned, binge eating then as well. And when you were saying that as well, is that in conjunction, would you say, with people being overweight as well? Obviously, it would be worse. Or are you just saying in general, these behaviors can be a problem regardless?
Oh, I definitely think being overweight is concerning, especially if your blood pressure is higher. Blood pressure is a very big deal. If you I like to use this analogy. Think of roofers. Like right now, I'm in Las Vegas. It's a nice day outside. If I needed to change the shingles on my roof, that wouldn't be much of a problem. Weather's fine. If I were in the Florida Keys and it's during a Category 3 hurricane, I'm having a hell of a time trying to put shingles on my roof. And if there's a hole in my roof, I'm probably eventually just going to pull out the duct tape and the plastic because I'm like, this is just pointless. Why am I trying to even do this? Your immune system works the same way. You have constant vasculature infarcts, the little bits of damage that can happen to it. There's also apoptosis of your endothelial cells, which is to say sometimes they need their own maintenance. And that even includes them dying on their own and then being replaced. And ideally, these things happen during spans of time where there's calm. Like when you're sleeping, that's one of the best times for your recovery. Your immune response can get the most done. It's closing hours, if you will, right? And this is where binging in either direction can be a problem. It's not just that if you're eating food around the clock and you cause a vascular tear, that now your immune response can't get to the breach quite as well, right? But then there's this other component, which is like over exercisers, right? You've probably heard about runners, especially ultra runners, who, surprise, will have heavy calcification in their LAD and their Widowmaker. And they'll be like, I don't understand why I'm like as strong as an ox. I believe it's because they're not prioritizing recovery as much as they should. They're binging in another way. I think that that's, if I'm trying to point to a blind spot you're not as familiar with, that's one of them. And then you throw on top of that blood pressure. Pressure is adding a storm on top of the whole thing. So if you have a constant increased blood pressure, you're adding a hurricane. You're making it more difficult during the downtime, even for the immune response to do something about, well, all kinds of things in your body, but particularly vasculature, I'm especially interested in. Now, beyond that, sure, there's the usuals. Don't have diabetes. Don't have any of the criteria of metabolic syndrome if you can help it, because there's plenty of data around that association that would concern me. And Yeah, beyond that, sleep, stress, a lot of the usuals, which I can admit I'm not that good at right now myself. Running this study is not that great for either of those two for me. But the study won't last forever. Knock on wood.
How much longer do you reckon you've got to go?
Well, so we've technically completed the original scope of the study, but I say original because everyone's very excited about us having an extension, and I've secured the budget for that. And now we're just in negotiations about what that looks like. Either it'll be 4-year scans or it'll be 5-year scans. I can't say right now whether I know for sure which one it'll be, but basically we're going to re-recruit as many of the original participants as we can to then get a third and final scan. And if it's, let's say it's 5-year scans, that means it'll be a third scan 5 years from when they got their very first scan. And that's powerful data. That's going to be really golden data if we get that.
And
So
this is the one, correct me if I'm wrong, the lean mass hyperresponder trial with 100 people?
yes. Yeah. The one I just did the presentation on.
Yeah, great. And with that as well, that's interesting because again, it's metabolically healthy people, right? Which
Yep.
is none of these long-term studies really have been ever like that's the issue with a lot of them. Isn't there? There's loads of other variables, but firstly, tell us. I know we touched on this last time. Tell the audience, just in case they don't know, what a lean mass hyperresponder is, and why is it that you decided to do this study with those kind of people?
Yeah, a lean mass hyperresponder. I actually myself coined the term in 2017 because there was already this term hyperresponder for somebody to see their cholesterol go up, and I called it lean mass hyperresponder to codify the qualifiers. It's these 3 cut points: LDL cholesterol of 190, which I think over there is a 5. I want to say something like that. I may be wrong. HDL of 80 or higher, and triglycerides of 70 or lower, and that's milligrams per deciliter. And those 3 cut points, high LDL, high HDL, low triglycerides, is what we wanted to get for this study. We have a slightly more relaxed criteria than those for our study participants, but that's what we recruited against. They otherwise need to not have a prior diagnosis of diabetes or atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease or hypertension or a few other things. So they were generally more healthy than the average population, to your point that you mentioned earlier. And we recruited them all, got a scan at day 0, whenever it was that they went to visit Lundquist Institute, and we flew them in there to get it. Then about 365 days later, about a year later, we flew them back to get a second scan. That way we would have a set of 100 scans for baseline and another set of 100 scans for follow-up. And we could compare the 2 scans to see if there was a substantial plaque increase between both population-wide and also to see what was happening with the individuals. And the short answer is that's why we now have these 4 analyses. The 4 analyses are 3 of the 4 show cohort wide. There's not much progression cohort wide, but with a subset that had high progression and with a subset that had regression. And then there's this one other data set, the Clearly data set, which says cohort wide, it's a bit higher than the other 3 and with no regression. And that's the one we wanted to get further analyses on, to compare to find out what's up.
Got it. So far, what you know, I know you're still waiting on some of the analysis. So far, based on what you know and you've taken away from it, what have you taken away from this, and what do you feel like? And do you feel like this is going to, the the lipid hypothesis debate and everything else? Do you think this is going to impact that?
I definitely think it's very, very, very relevant to people who are inside the low carb community who have just been wanting some data. I'm one of them. 10 years ago, I was like, is there any data on, even if it's not people on low carb diet, is there just data on healthy people with, high LDL and no other cardiovascular disease risk factors, just so that we could see for sure that the high LDL and high ApoB, independent of these other clusters, was driving it? Because here's the thing. The thing is, all of these studies are usually looking at high LDL in the context of some kind of metabolic dysfunction or impairment. And these dysfunctions or impairments are often doing both an increase in LDL or some change to lipid profile and are an independent risk factor for cardiovascular disease. So that does become a challenge because you need to disentangle these confounders, this cluster away. And that's where lean mass hyperresponders gave us kind of a scientific opportunity to look at a group of people that are otherwise metabolically healthy, but with sky high LDL to see if there's that association. And so far, no. And in the data set that we have, including the Clearly data set, in all 4 analyses, there is no association between LDL cholesterol and ApoB and corresponding plaque progression or appearance with even the presentation of plaque at baseline. Nothing. So it's been pretty incredible data so far.
Wow. Because like you say, we do the readings here just to break down, give you an example, right? I'm pretty healthy. I would consider myself to be pretty healthy. I live a relatively healthy life, but my LDL, sorry, it was 5.1 fasting. No, sorry, 5, I think it was 5.5. Glycerides were 1, bang on 1, for example. And the HDL was 1.5. So that's kind of where I was at with those markers anyway. And I know there's a lot of other health markers to look at, but based on that, would you say that's kind of like a normal range? What would you say?
Yeah, that's close. That's a triad. That's high LDL, high HDL, low triglycerides.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. That's what I was getting at.
And yes, that triad is what we're interested in. We want to understand, is this, because of course the expectation currently is that if you have high LDL, it will put you at a higher risk population wide towards cardiovascular disease. And I would say that my colleagues right now, especially the clinicians, would say, actually, it's looking more and more like this is just like any other middle-aged population, where there is some subset of people who are rapid progressors. But if metabolically healthy, if the whole population is metabolically healthy, that's just that subset. The wider population seems to be not at high risk. But
Okay.
again, they themselves would probably say, well, okay, but let's still get an image and just confirm or disconfirm
Yep.
whether you have existing cardiovascular disease, because in that case, they'd be more interested in taking steps to treat.
Yeah, 100%. Because that's all that was in red. See, Dave, on my blood markers, it was the 7.5 cholesterol was in red. Everything else was looking really, really good. In fact, my iron was almost too high. You probably heard that before with like red meat,
Yeah, but
with steak. But yeah,
use
not too high. It was like it's like healthy, but it's like borderline where it's too high.
yeah, there is a too high with iron, but I usually don't find it coming from red meat. It's usually coming from usually you're eating other foods that are high or not high in
Yeah,
iron. But I don't know. I guess it varies per person.
yeah, could be the beef liver as well. Yeah, and there's lots of variables anyway in there which
Ah,
could
yes. If
change.
you're eating a lot of beef liver, then I could believe it.
100%. That's going to get it through the roof, right? It's got
Yes.
like 10 times more B12 as well, haven't it? Than
There's
steak.
somebody I know who that was just all they eat. They just
Oh,
ate
really? Oh,
liver.
yeah, and copper as well, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of
Yeah,
minerals you gotta be mindful of
yeah,
if you're gonna eat that much. A lot of minerals, a lot of metal. Anyway,
yeah. No, I don't just eat beef liver, but I eat a fair amount, so that could play a part. Um, but yeah, so just to kind of summarize what we talked about there as well, in terms of what do you reckon anyway going forward? If you could like fast forward a year, maybe even 5 years from now, do you think not just with what you're doing, right? I know there's a few people out there now, experts diving into this, but to actually do this, like you say, from what you were saying, there was virtually none you could find studies in metabolically healthy people highlight
I
this.
mean, I Miami Heart would be the closest, I would
Yeah.
say, but it's cross-sectional, it's not longitudinal. What I want is longitudinal. That's why this 3rd set of scans is very exciting, because there's never been anything close to this, where you could actually see a trajectory. We could actually
Mm.
watch, first scan, second scan, third scan. But yeah, we should look. I'm going to get on my soapbox for a sec, but we should make it a priority to study metabolically healthy people, period, so that we have it as a constant comparator to all of these other studies. The challenge is, how often is it that data arises from populations we know are metabolically compromised, and they become our our like ranges for blood work, for example, right? Right. Over here, and I think you may have a different measurement there, but our insulin is measured in a range between, I want to say they have it as 4 milli-IU to 24. And
Yeah.
24 is way too high a fasting insulin. And I think there's more than enough data to support what I'm saying.
Yeah.
We should be alarmed after 10 milli-IU.
Okay.
And really, everyone should be down there around like 5 or 6, frankly. But again, I can understand how they got to those numbers. They just don't study metabolically healthy people enough to see
Hmm.
the difference.
That's the issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
I was trying to remember. I was trying to find that out. But yeah, even the numbers I gave you then with cholesterol and stuff, they're different readings, right? They're different metrics than you use in America, right?
Yes, correct. It's
Yeah.
you guys use millimoles per
Per
liter.
liter.
We
Yeah.
use milligrams per deciliter. And not to sound like I'm dissing my country a lot, but really, I
You're
like,
going hard today, Dave.
but I do like millimoles per liter more than milligrams per deciliter. There's just a lot of times where I'm going, some whenever I visit whenever I visit Europe, I also love how everything's in grams. I
Hmm.
love how there's not as much shenanigans with portion sizes we have over here.
Yeah.
A lot of times you'll have what the breakdown of nutrition is per 100 grams. I feel like that's way more honest and it's way better.
Then
And
ounces.
yeah, then
Yeah,
out
yeah, 100%.
ounces, but also these serving sizes. I
The
like
serving sizes. Yeah, yeah,
bigger
yeah.
serving size, creations that I think become very problematic because then a lot of things get rounded to zero. Anyway, I'm just
The metric system is crazy. Obviously, most of my clients are actually in America, believe it or not, and it just goes over my head a lot. Ounces. I'm like, right, let's drink this amount of liters of water, and it's like ounces. I'm like, that's one thing that goes over my mind. The ounces is complex, but yeah, just with this the serving size and the portion sizes in general, it's not the best over there. But okay, one more thing I wanted to ask you going forward now, David. Right, Dave, should I say? Longer term, I know you don't really want to think about following up and all this research now, right? You need a break from it, but just different cohorts and stuff. Are you thinking about that going forward? Maybe
oh yeah.
diverse ages or women or
Oh yeah, well we have I mean we do of course have women in our current study and we do have a range on ages. But for our next study, it's the triad study. The key thing is it's going to be a bit more relaxed in its eligibility criteria. This first one was higher HDL, lower triglycerides, then what probably the next one will be. The next one will probably be, for example, an HDL of 50 or higher, triglycerides of 100 or lower. I think in your units, that's actually pretty close to the numbers you gave me in millimoles.
yep,
That's still the triad, but a lot easier to hit that range. We may have it to where, for example, they do have one or more risk factors depending. We got to figure out what threshold we're going to allow in. But this just wouldn't have been possible. The study design I'm telling you about wouldn't have been possible were it not for the current study proving that indeed there does not seem to be as much of an immediate urgency in that association of high LDL. And again, I want to be a good scientist. It's possible the third year scans do show an association. We don't know. Right. But in the immediate term, could we set up this triad study and probably pass an IRB easier because of the previous study? Yes. And that's why we can be happy the current study has provided such good information.
awesome, awesome. And I wanted to just quickly ask you as well in terms of how you've managed pushback. I've seen it online as well. Obviously, you can't hide from it. Like we said off air, right, with the social media. I saw some of them. I'm like, wow, that's like you said. You actually said at the start, it's a bit of a war, right? Let's be honest, that's what it
Yeah.
is. You are. It is like that, though. It's not just minus the guns and the actual physical. It's like a lot of emotional and mental challenge, right? That's what comes with putting yourself out there, like you have, and just standing firm on something you believe in and actually doing the. It's a lot of work, man. How have you managed all the pushback and the stress and stuff and the sleep? I know you wear the aura, right? Same as me.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, yeah.
I would love to be able to say, well, I take it all in stride. It all rolls off my back. No, I have my days where I'm probably complaining a lot more than would before all of this started. But I'm thankful to have a lot of friends I trust where, they can be somebody I chat with about this. In the overall, I think I always take solace in all the best stories have struggle and darkness before the dawn, all of that kind of thing. You've got to still rest a lot on what you really believe in. And if you really believe in the work, then you got to keep pushing forward. And I'm really glad I take my own advice on that because now here we are, right? Now here we are at the point where we have all of these analyses in hand. And I'm not gonna lie, this has been a great moment. I've really appreciated finally getting here, and I can't be more thankful for everybody who's supported this effort and made this a reality. And that if I were to pick on one thing that helps me on a personal level, it's that there's just so many people who have a hand in pushing this thing along. It feels like truly the definition of grassroots. I mean, really. And that's exciting. It really is.
Now, I wanted to say I love what you're doing, man, because it's hard work, goes without saying, right? Anything worthwhile is. But what you're standing for, because I see it firsthand with people trying to move in the right direction with their health. And there's so much confusion out there. And it's almost, let's just say how it is, especially with nutrition, it's like a religion nowadays, right? That's like a war within itself when and people get confused and conflicted, and they might be doing some of the right stuff. And then for like some of the blood markers we talked about earlier might be a bit off, and it puts them off, and actually it can send them in the wrong direction. But I think people just having the information and the awareness and doing this kind of research on metabolically healthy people. Yeah, I love what you're doing, man. Got to give you credit for it.
All right. Yeah.
Awesome work, man. I was going to say, where's the best place to send the audience to? I'm going to put the YouTube in and stuff. Is there anything specifically they should watch, or shall I just send them over to your main channels?
Yeah, go ahead and send them to my main channels. Obviously, I'm very active, or at least I will be more active on Twitter/X, Real Dave Feldman. I'm trying to engage Instagram once in a while. I'll have to admit I'm not a big Instagram person, but that's also Real Dave Feldman. And yeah, the YouTube channel. I'm not sure if it'll be launched by this point, but I'm very close to launching a podcast. So I'll have my own up pretty soon. It's an in-person only podcast, and we have a lot of guests in the can. It's going to be pretty exciting.
Great. I'll send the audience over to you anyway. Also, I was going to say about I was going to say something then regarding the podcast. My camera, you can see my camera's playing up, right? It put me off. Yeah. I'm not going to do this to the end of the podcast. I'm like trying to focus. I can see it zooming in and out. But no, long story short, I was going to say with Twitter, yeah, I'm not very active on Twitter, mainly on Instagram, so I'm the opposite. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because I'll share this onto X, should I say, and I'll share your links in the show notes. But everyone go check him out. Go and get up to date, because you've documented most of it. I know there's more to put out there. You've documented most of this right on your YouTube and stuff as well, because I've been following some of it. So I'll put that in the show notes. Thanks again for coming on for the second time, my man.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Martin.
Before we wrap up this episode, there's two things you need to know. One, I'm giving one more person the chance to come along to my Inner Circle client call this Friday. If you need clarity, if you're stuck and you're not getting results, and you want to ask me questions on a personal level and see what it's like within the OYB community, all you got to do is click the link beneath. Only one more person can come. I'm only allowing 2 people to come to this, and you don't want to miss it. Click below and do it fast, because only one more person. It's in the show notes. Finally, if you want to get on the waiting list to join the free WhatsApp community that we're kicking off very soon, because we're only giving access to the first 20 people free access, then that's also in the show notes. And don't forget to get your free metabolic health assessment if you're looking to lose fat and get healthier or build muscle. And then, last thing, just check out the last episode I did with Dave Feldman. We did an episode about a year ago. So if you haven't seen that, click here. I might be pointing the wrong way. Don't know where the video is. And check that out. A lot of gold in that one. Thanks.